Welcome to the Hip Hop Hustle podcast. I'm with one of the most prolific rappers I've ever spoken to, Mega Ran. If you haven't heard of him, I highly recommend. You could probably spend the next 2 years only listening to Mega Ran because he's got that many projects. He releases so much music. And the most interesting part, and something that I found super interesting, is that you release a lot of music for video games, and you have a deal, or you had a deal. I'm not sure if that's still going. It seems like it's still going with, I think it's Comic-Con you were working with as well. And you've done Mortal Kombat. You've literally done so many video games across the board. I just think that's really cool that, it's not a lot of rappers that you see delve into that world, because I think, rappers have a different image of what they want to be. But man, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I appreciate it, dude. So the company I work with is Capcom, and they've made games like, Resident Evil, Mega Man, Street Fighter, a bunch of other things. And so working with them has led me to some really cool opportunities to work with other companies, so people will hit me up and be like, hey, soundtrack for Mortal Kombat, do you want to work on that, or something else for this? So they've all just led to really interesting opportunities to springboard around, and to recently getting my music in WWE. So, it's been a really interesting road, and hip hop is at the root of it. So I do appreciate you having me here.
Well, it's my pleasure. And that being said, it's not like you haven't worked with some fantastic artists. Like, it's not like you're just in this one lane. You've also worked with some really fantastic artists, Mickey Facts, Rex, Bag of Tricks Cat, who I had on the show. You also work with Whitney Payton. So literally the list goes on and on. So it's not like you're one trick pony. Like, you actually have the legitimate skill set of a fantastic rapper, which is also really impressive that you just had. Like, it's not like you just found your niche and you stuck to that. Like, you still developed your craft, and the words and the rhyme schemes, they still really flow amazingly well.
Thank you. That's super important to me, is maintaining, I guess, hip hop cred, so to speak. I mean, I came up at open mics. I came up in Philadelphia, a town where it's not necessarily easy to be an up and coming rapper. Like, you got to be able to hold your own. Like, I'm probably very biased, but I think Philadelphia is home to some of the greatest MCs of all time. Between Black Thought of the Roots, Beanie Siegel, the Meek Mill, there's just so many great artists that have come out of that town. And so there's a higher standard, so you got to be pretty good. So I say all that to say I couldn't get here if I was trash, so yeah, like, I have to be that because I've grew up in that, like, open mics, battling, ciphers, all those things are things that I really love and enjoy. And I've just been able to sort of, I wouldn't even say pivot, but just being able to do what I do, and also focus on the things that I love, which are comics, video games, anime, all that. And the thing is, like, we're seeing it more and more with today's artists, where they're a lot more comfortable with their full selves. But back in the day, and like you said, maybe it is an image thing, but like, kids coming up in the 90s were kind of afraid to wear their, influences on their sleeve. Like, we all traded comic books coming up in middle school, high school. We read comic books. And then for some reason, it just wasn't cool to take that world and put it into, to hip hop. And for me, it started with Wu-Tang. When I heard Wu-Tang Protect Your Neck, and Inspector Deck's first line, maybe first or second line, is swinging through your town like your neighborhood spider, man. And I was like, whoa, it blew my mind. Like, oh, he watched that too. Like, oh, okay. And Wu-Tang, especially, like, it was Saturday morning kung fu flicks for them. And in that same way that Wu-Tang changed the game using their influences, it's basically what I've done. It's what MF Doom did. It's what, Del the Funky Homo Sapien has done. It's what Czarface does today, So you're seeing the lineage of a bunch of guys who are, 80s and 90s babies who aren't afraid to wear their, influences proudly.
Well, why do you think that was, that like people were like drifted away from what they did when they were younger, like comic books, and like, because now it's all like what I would say is sexy is like sport, athletes, like they're the cool things to be into. Whereas like if you're into comic books and video games, like the image of who you are is like you sit in your mum's basement, when that's not really true, because, you know, I think during lockdown especially, we've seen that like all those things really come to the forefront. And now you've got mainstream, you know, people on Twitch, you've got people who compete in video games, you've got people who compete, and it's actually a sport. So what do you think it was that kind of pushed it away for hip hop originally?
Originally, I just think that hip hop originated as the cool culture. You know what I mean? It was like, it was counterculture. It was badass. It was, you know, just being a rebel, you know? And so there was nothing badass about sitting at home and playing video games. You know, it was like, nah, man, put the games down, go outside and let's get into some trouble. You know, like that was cool. And I have to thank artists like Kanye, you know, love him or hate him, you know, guys like Kanye led to artists like Lupe Fiasco, to Drake, to others who not only were good at rapping and producing, but also like not afraid to, you know, be in touch with their feelings, be in touch with their influences and things like that. So I think on a mainstream level, it started with like guys like Kanye, but there was always that alternative, you know, the backpackers, in the battle rap scene. I mean, every other line in a battle rap is usually a reference to a cartoon or a game or a sport or one of those things that they really loved coming up, and they flipped it into metaphors and punchlines. But just in the beginning, it was just so counterculture that it just, I think at the same, and I've done a lot of reports and research on this, so bear with me, but hip hop and video games have both kind of come up at the same time. You know what I mean? They're both things that were born in the 80s, maybe, you know, late 70s, and flourished in the 80s, 90s, but initially were looked at as fads, you know, like passing fads that were just going to be a cheap cash in and go away. And so because I think they both came up at the same time, it was a little harder to look left or right because we're both trying to fight for that relevancy. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. And I mean, one of the cool things about, well, both of them essentially is the technology has really helped both industries. Obviously with video games, it's obvious, but you can see with hip hop, the sound has really developed quite dramatically. I mean, I marvel at the difference in 20 years between what artists were doing in the 90s versus what they're doing now. And just even the sound quality and even the ability of any artist to be able to produce music is so much easier than it was. And now video games are so accessible for everyone. Obviously, if you wanted a PS5, it was pretty tough to get one for a while, but
yeah, that's not super accessible. Yeah.
But generally, I mean, you can play games on mobile phone games are crazy. They've gone through the roof. You've got obviously laptops, computers. Literally, you can play a game on every device that you have. So it's like both arenas have become so accessible as well.
Yeah, at the same time, you can make a hip hop beat on every piece of equipment or anything laying around your house at this point. You know, there are people making beats on their phones that rival, you know, $1 million studios, you know, laptops, iPads, you know, there are programs now that will allow you to do some amazing things. You can record at home and get top quality studio, you know, sound for a fraction of the cost, you know? So I think we've seen that, especially in production, you know, like I've heard like beats continue to evolve, you know, and through that leads to rappers evolving. I'm like the sound of the rap, the basic style of rap for a 19-year-old is not, you know, today what it was for a 19-year-old in 1992, you know, like, and it's fascinating. It really is. Like I'm blown away as an older guy, you know, I'm 40 plus. And so when I listen to guys like Lil Baby and, you know, and I'm just like, whoa, like the flow is so different now. And like, I love that, you know, if you're a 90s guy, you know, there's a mid-tempo 4/4 flow that you can pretty much apply to any beat. And so when you came to a radio station, they play any beat and you were able to apply your lyrics to that beat. But kids today, like that doesn't apply. Like they're working on a completely different wavelength and brain frequency, which is creating a whole new sound, which is really exciting.
Well, I'm in the middle. I like see both the negative and positives. And I feel like, because I love 90s hip hop, like that's the first thing that I really gravitated towards. But then I also don't really understand people who only listen to 90s hip hop, because like it definitely serves a purpose and it's amazing. But then listening to new hip hop, if you don't listen to new hip hop, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot, because like you're not getting new music. Like, why wouldn't you want to try and find good artists that you like? It doesn't have to be every artist. It just has to be the artist that you like. It's the same as the 90s. There were plenty of trash artists in the 90s. We just forget that.
Everybody seems to forget. It's weird, man. Like you listen to older artists, you can kind of tell. Like I'm sure you do a ton of interviews, so I'm sure, Aaron, if you're asking like a veteran MC, who are your favorite new guys? They probably all say, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole. These guys are really, they're great. And it's like, all right, first of all, these guys aren't new. they've been doing this for 10 years plus at this point. And they're kind of the obvious default answer to be like, oh, these guys are good. And it's like, come on, in the last 10 years, you can't think that nothing good has come out, So if you do think that, like, your mind is clearly closed, and it takes a lot I'm glad we've got out of we haven't totally got out of like ageism in hip hop, but at least I don't hear the term like mumble rap a lot anymore, which is good, because I thought that was extremely disrespectful and like really knocking what a lot of these younger kids were doing, and so when people say like, oh, this is the real hip hop and this isn't, and it's like, oh man, that's a really destructive attitude. And with that, the culture can't really grow, so I'm able to pull some cool things out of what we hear today and find some inspirations in it. Now, my new album is a tribute to the past, on purpose, because to me, I have very warm memories of the 90s, so that's what I wanted to visit. But on other releases, I'm very like happy to, to channel newer sounds, newer styles, newer, approaches to making music.
Do you know what I think people missed when they were, in the the mumble rap era, so to speak, when they were using that phrase a lot, was like the voices are still instruments and they still add to the track. So they may not be saying anything that you would consider is in depth or insanely, poetic. But what they did was they found the right tone for their voice to really add to the track. And there are so many of them where like the voice becomes the instrument and it adds. And if it wasn't there, then the track wouldn't be the same. So I feel like the technique of figuring out where does my voice play into this was kind of lost on a lot of people, because they were focused on what was actually being said. But the production and figuring out, the beat, where does my voice sit in there? I think that went over for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I could clearly remember Young Thug, and the first time I heard him, and we were just like, what is this? And it was polarizing. Some people were like, oh, this is garbage. And then some people thinking like, this is extremely interesting. Like at the end of the day, this is an interesting thing that's never been done with a voice on music. So, so being open-minded to that. And like you said, using your voice as an instrument is really, really like essential for understanding what's going on.
Well, one of my friends showed me a Young Thug track, Anybody, and I've been obsessed with it. It's featuring Nicki Minaj, and it is so catchy. I don't know what it is about Young Thug, but he just knows how to get a catchy track out there. It's just, I know it's feel good music. It's not going to make you think about anything. It's like really kind of meditative and hypnotic in a way. Travis Scott tends to have the same effect on me, where it's like kind of hypnotic all at the same time. I don't know. I think there's a place for everything.
Absolutely. I had an older friend tell me like, everyone should be able to make music, like everyone. And I was like, really? Like when I was younger, I was like, I don't know, man. I think some people that are just bad at it should not do it. And he's like, well, who's to say what's bad? They could speak to a person or a generation that someone who's more skilled, in your opinion, could not reach. So who's to say this isn't important? I'm much more of that mindset now, where like absolutely everybody should be able to make music. There's room for everybody.
Well, I think more so that everybody should be able to create art, whatever that looks like. Like, I think it's weird. And you were in education before you became an artist as well. But it's strange because, like, I remember when I was in school, like the sciences, the maths, the English, like the traditional forms of education are really pushed, but then art in its form, creativity, isn't pushed as much. And I think that, now I've found my own version of creativity, and you've obviously done the same, but it's like interesting to see that people are really striving to find their creative selves now outside of the traditional kind of areas of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really good time for learning and expanding your mind.
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think that falls away? That kind of comes after, traditional education.
It's interesting because I kind of dwell on this a little bit on the album. I talk about it because album's called Live 95, and 95 is the year that I started college. And I was just thinking about how, like, I don't remember a whole lot of what I learned in class in school at all, but before I go out on a limb and say, oh, I didn't learn anything in college, it was a waste of time, waste of money, I think like, oh, wait, I learned about myself during that time. I learned how to be an individual. I learned the things that I like and love and are willing to fight for, and, and really make important pieces of my life, and what type of people I want around me and things like that. So I think a lot of that stuff comes from after and outside of, traditional learning, because like you said, traditional learning has been so based in science, math, finite things, reciting facts and things like that. And that's really not what life's about. Once you get further out of that sphere of thinking is when you really start to grow and learn, when it's about people, it's about solving problems. And, these are the things that are going to make you a millionaire, not being able to recite facts, so it's a really interesting question, and something that I've been exploring. I don't know if I have the answer, but I definitely know that it's been something that in my own life, I've been able to kind of pinpoint moments like, oh, I learned that because of, college time, or the time that I spent away from home and just learning about myself, so I really can't explain why it is. We're just in a interesting society that places a focus on some things that, are not necessarily the things that I think make better people. We kind of make better workers and not necessarily better people in our system. And I taught school for many years, for 5 years, and I couldn't do it anymore because I just quite frankly didn't believe in it anymore. I just thought that the system needed a lot of work, and they placed so much emphasis and focus on things that just to me weren't important. I would get disciplinary action if I didn't have enough posters on the wall. Really? They were like, yeah, you got to have more motivational posters. And I'm like, well, okay, I understand that. But what about what I'm actually teaching them? Like, the stuff that we're talking about is supposed to be important, right? Well, yeah, they need motivational material on the walls, and I'm like, why are we arguing about this when, half the students in here can't read at grade level, like let's get to some real issues, and so, yeah, I found myself at a point where like, I don't think I'd go back, like, unless there was some serious changes. I told my wife, like, I'd go work at Walmart if this all falls apart before I would go back to teaching. And I don't know if you guys have Walmart in Australia, but I'm sure you're familiar with, or you have something similar.
Very much so. Everyone's heard of Walmart. We don't have it here, but we've got Costco here. I'm assuming it's similar.
Yeah, similar to Costco. I'd work at a Costco for sure because they have free samples that are amazing.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, you get to taste food. They probably haven't done it since COVID, but they would have like chefs making food using the items that Costco sells. And they're like maybe cutting something up and they're making some cheese, whatever, or some pasta. And they're like, hey, come over and try some. And you're like, boop, boop. And, and you go to another spot on the other side, and like, we're making pizza, try some, and you could wind up full. You don't even need dinner by the time you come out of Costco. It's Costco's pretty great for that.
I remember the last time I went to Costco, I literally just bought so much shit I didn't need because I was like, look at the value. Look at, look at how much I can get. And I remember we bought a tub of hummus, like it was 1 kilo, I remember. And we had it in the fridge for 8. Yeah. And it was just like any excuse to eat it because you're like, we got to get through it. I've got a kilo.
Got to eat it.
You just do you just do all those things.
That's funny. But we go in there and we buy like 20 packs of like paper towel rolls and toilet tissue. And we're like, we're going to use this eventually. So it's fine. But perishable stuff, I probably would not try to buy a lot of.
But also like shit that I would never buy at a normal supermarket. Like I remember I bought like 100 frozen roti breads. Like I don't know why I need that. And I would never buy it at a supermarket, but I was like, yeah, it was huge. It was so big. And I would be like, all right, every day, let's chuck it in. Let's get it toasted. And let's
gotta eat it every day now. I feel like that when I buy bread, because I'm not a big bread eater, but when I buy a loaf of bread, I'm like, oh, I better make sandwiches every day then, like, or else it's gonna go to waste.
Bread is my weakness, honestly. Bread is like, I love carbs, anything carbs, and I will fuck that shit up. Like it is just amazing. And
same.
It's so difficult to not eat it because like I smell a burger and I get fat. That's like the reality of my life.
Oh, wow. Oh, man.
Well, on that education piece, I was just going to say, like, it's weird because it's like I've spoken and, you know, to a few people, a few hip hop artists, and they all kind of have a take on this is like, the weird thing is that, like you said, we don't teach people life skills. Like we don't teach them how to get through life in the world that we live in. They teach them, like you said, they create workers, but it's like no one comes out of school being able to do taxes. No one comes out of school, you know, understanding, you know, how to communicate effectively with people. No one comes out of school, you know, just even there's nothing about like, all right, it's really important to have balance in your life and you need to be able to explore this or that. And like, we encourage you to do different things. It's all like, all right, 4 + 4 is 8, which is important. But like, I don't remember a time in my life since, and I went to university and I did not do any graphs about maths ever since I stopped learning. It's just, I don't understand why we had to do it. And then you lose mark for the X and Y axis. And I'm like,
yeah, completely meaningless. Like, and not necessarily, I guess it's the discipline it took for you to, you know, figure those out and to stick with it. That is the skill that you're going to come out with. But yeah, I talk about that on the new album too. Like there's a song, Craig Hodges, where I talk about, they told me that college would be the best look, couldn't change a tire and couldn't balance a checkbook. You know what I mean? Like I don't have any life skills, but yet, you know, you walk to a college, the moment you step on a college campus, these predatory, you know, credit card salesmen pushers are instantly just throwing you, hey, you want a free t-shirt? Here, come on, sign up for this credit card you'll be paying off for the next 7 years. And it's just like instantly throws you in debt. And, you know, like I said, I got a refund check. I put it in the bank and again, couldn't balance a checkbook. I couldn't figure it out. I was just like, oh, you just write checks and it's free money. And, you know, so many things that just set you up like instantly. My first year of college, instantly, I have bad credit and I'm in debt. You know what I'm saying? So it's like such a terrible predatory cycle that they put, you know, a lot of young kids through, you know, that you really don't have a chance. You know, it's your first bit of individuality and alone time. And then people just start throwing you things that you can't handle. You know, it's almost like in music, you know, to bring it back to hip hop, you know, a lot of young kids get early success in music, you know, and they're not teaching them that, hey, this money's a loan and hey, this is an interest rate and this is, you got to pay for studio time and all the time when you were hanging out with the homies and all these flights, you're being billed for all this. And they don't tell you any of that. And then next thing you know, they're disgruntled, they're upset, they're not making any money from their label or whatever. And then they're forced to kind of do the independent thing. And so I'm very happy. Like I've signed one deal in my day, and it was a good deal. But honestly, I like working by myself. I like being my own boss, having my own company, answering to myself, and being able to help out friends when I need to, So I release music with my friends, from my friends, if they have something good that they pitch to me. I just have a couple of like very small caveats. I'm always like, give me something creative. I always say like, give me some Renaissance stuff, and they're like, what does that even mean? I'm like, I don't know. I just know it when I hear it, give me something Renaissance, and that's what I want. I just want something that's going to touch, like spark some ideas for the future. And like, if it's a rap album, I always say, can you keep it clean? And then there's always like a challenge for a lot of rappers to keep their music clean. But I just want to provide that to the marketplace, to be like, hey, look, here's a place you can go if you want clean rap albums that are going to be creative and fun. So Random Beats is the label that I run those things under. And so yeah, like, it's just, I don't think I could do if I was signed to another label, like I'd have to follow their rules and their schedules and all those things. So I really enjoy being independent for that reason. And I've seen so many friends, they can't tour when they want to. They, they owe record labels money, so they can't put out an album, because they're going to go broke, because they signed something when they were young. So it's very similar to the whole college experience for a lot of people.
Well, before anyone checks my background, actually, my first job out of university, I was selling credit cards. I used to be a credit card salesperson.
You were one of those guys.
Yeah, I was.
Okay, what were you giving away? Like a free Frisbee or a T-shirt?
None of that.
A mug? Nothing?
I actually think, because I was doing it over the phone. So I was a phone salesperson.
Okay, right? Okay.
I wasn't giving anything away. I still think I can sell a credit card to anybody. I'm not going to do it. But like, I have credit cards of my own. But like, you have to know how to use them, and working at the bank, that taught me how to use it. So you can kind of, but I'm just going to give this is my opinion. Listen to it if you want, but if you're not getting points, don't get a credit card. It's worthless. That's my personal opinion. But anyway, if you can't manage your money, don't get it. It's horrible, and you will end up in bad debt. It's for people who can manage their money and kind of have, a routine. They know how to save. You don't spend too much. But before this turns into a banking podcast, which it definitely could, because my friends used to call me half man, half bank, because I used to talk about it a lot. It just became I don't know. It was the new thing that I was learning, so I talked about it.
Okay, that's fine.
So
that's information people could benefit from.
Definitely. But I think that's a different podcast that I'll start. It's like the bank hour. I don't know. I don't think anyone will listen, but why? So why did you go clean? Like, what's the motivator behind clean music? Because I did notice as well that you don't use the traditional hip hop language. Like you very much control. You don't have swearing in there. So why did you decide to remove all of that? Because I'm sure, like, swear words have this like weird way of helping you rhyme. They're just kind of very punchy. There's a lot of emotion in there. But why? Do it?
I'm not against profanity per se. I just felt like it was that I wanted to be able to challenge myself to be able to finish songs and albums without any profanity. Because when I did, I felt like it was kind of a crutch. Like, there are times that it's needed. Like one of my instructors, Michael Cord, used to always say, like, NWA, when they wanted to talk about police brutality in Los Angeles, they couldn't say "darn the police," like that would have never worked. No one would have felt anything, it wouldn't have caused any sort of change or made any movement. So, it takes powerful language for powerful situations. However, that's a powerful situation, not like me saying I have more money than anybody else or I'm cooler than anybody else. That's not a situation that calls for strong language, in my opinion. So if it called for it, like if there was a moment, and I wouldn't self-censor myself, honestly. Like if there's a moment that calls for it in my music where I just absolutely have to drop an F-bomb, like I'll do it. But I haven't yet in 10 years. And so I don't really need to, not to say that it doesn't come out of my everyday life, but in my music, I have much more control than if I'm having a conversation with you, So, and I just wanted my mom to be able to listen to my music, at a surface level. Like my mom to let her friends hear it and be like, oh, listen to this, listen to what he's doing. And I just wanted to prove it could be done. It was a matter of me proving it to myself. So for my first album, it was like, can I make a full, clean album? Yes. Can it be successful? Ooh, we don't know. And then it kind of is, it gets a couple thousand downloads. I mean, which was decent. And now 10 years later, like I have a 95% clean catalog, outside of my friends who I'll have featured on records. And I've still been able to be successful. My last album was on Billboard. Like, we've been able to do this, and it's possible, and Will Smith is another big inspiration to me. I just read his book, and he was saying, like, he kept it clean for his grandma. Like, he just didn't want his grandma to hear him talking like that. So, and it was kind of like that with my mom. And so that's really it. Like, at the end of the day, it was a challenge for me, and I didn't expect the challenge to last 10 years, but it has. And so I'm like, well, why stop now?
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I always worry about the podcast. I don't know what I say half the time. So there's bound to be things that, my friends and family will cringe at, but it's cool that you've kept with like the motivation, like because it would be so tempting to just be like, you know what, for this album, let's just let it go. And let's just say all the things that I could have been saying, but it is cool and it is good for hip hop to have artists that don't use profanities, because then, parents can show their kids what hip hop is. Because I feel like when people talk about being exposed to hip hop young, and I was exposed to hip hop young just by accident, like I was listening to 50 Cent, but like, it's not the language you really want your young kids to be listening to. So not necessarily, but I mean, that comes with good parenting though. I mean, parents can be like, hey, look, that's what this guy does because he's a grown up and because he has a job and this is what it calls for sometimes, but you don't do that, and if you can reach your kids in that way, maybe you can convince them to not do that, so I don't think it's bad. I just think it's like painting with a paintbrush and being like, all right, well, he uses a lot of red in his paint, and red might cause a certain reaction. So, that's the color he likes. And me, I use a lot of blues over here. And so that's all. It's just like an accent or seasoning on things. And so, yeah, like, and then when you mention like clean versions of songs, like having clean songs for kids to listen to is a great bonus. And not just an edited version, where it's like, oh, I put my in her and she, and it's like, all right, come on. Like, what's happening right there. Like, that's not a clean song at all, just because you didn't say the words, and so those are things that like I think about a lot. Like, it's a challenge for me to, like, I DJ a lot of parties and things, and it's a challenge for me to find clean music. And so I just want to be able to help that situation and be like, oh yeah, I got some stuff that'll work on it. Also, half the clean versions, they've inserted a word that makes no sense. Like, it's just like the tempo, and then a random word is to cut off the swear word, and then it goes back in. And if you know the real version, you're like, I can spot this a mile away. You know what I mean? Like, you just like, it's so bad. Like, it's just,
oh yeah,
really
I can't
bad.
buy an edited version of an album. Like, and like I said, I don't use any profanity, but I don't want to hear anyone being censored, especially like in a silly way, where it's like sound effects or like a word that makes no sense. It's like when you watch a TV version of a movie, and it's on TV and they're just like, this mother loving loser. And you're like, no one talks like that.
Well, they just cut the whole scene. Yeah,
they just cut a scene.
Is it just me or did I miss something? Did I like,
yeah.
So funny. It's so funny. I like the worst ones for me are like, the scratches, like they put a scratch in where it's like, but then they also make an edited version of a track that shouldn't be edited because it has so many swear words. It's like, I'm missing 90% of what's being said here because you have to edit it all out.
Yeah. I couldn't believe they did a video for WAP, the, Cardi B, Megan song. And I mean, that's a nasty song. And then like when you edit it, the acronym doesn't even work the same. It's not WAP anymore. They're like wet and gushy. And it's like, wait a minute. Now it's WAG. Like, wait, you just changed the name of the song just so that you didn't want to say these words. It makes no sense. So yeah, it's silly.
But like, again, it's just kind of the era that we're in that you'll get it. But I don't know. Do you have WAGs? Like we have in Australia, we have like, they're called wives and girlfriends. So whenever like they're sporting the stars, they're like wives and girlfriends. They're the WAGs. So if they're like bring them along, the WAGs are watching the game. It's such a weird acronym. Like we have it. I wasn't sure if you have it.
That is weird. We don't have that. I mean, it makes sense though, wives and girlfriends, but no, we don't use that at all.
But I've been trying to figure out if there's an opposite for like, husbands and boyfriends, like.
Yeah, like we gotta be gender fair on this. So there should be, a husbands and boyfriends section or something.
Abs. It's so weird that we have to shorten it, that we can't even say, husbands and boyfriends. It's like too difficult for us. We have to be like, everything has to be an acronym.
Everything's got to be shortened, everything.
Well, something I did want to ask you about was your kind of pace for releasing music, because as I said, you're one of the most prolific artists I've spoke to in terms of, number one, work ethic, but also the amount of music you drop. How does that come about? How do you keep yourself from just like dropping project after project?
Well, I've honestly, it's like whenever inspiration comes, I work on things and I try not to release them until like at that time makes sense, but I'm big on dates, anniversaries, it's like, okay, well, if today is the 1 year anniversary of the first time I put out a song, then I may put something out on that day, or I'm talking about a video game and it's the game's release date. I'll do something like that. But, I think about like MF Doom, who was one of my favorites, and Doom did so many collaborations. He did so many releases, there's like rare releases. There's like the big releases, and then there's like the rare little loosies that pop out, so I try to do like that. I don't want to wait or waste too much time. I always feel like I'm making up for lost time as an artist. I'm an older artist. I'm not platinum, so. And again, there's no rules to what I do. So it's like, I can put out a song today about basketball and then 2 days later, put out a song about Mega Man. And those can reach two different audiences completely. There's no overlap, because the nerd fans might not like the basketball song or vice versa, so I think because I'm using so many different like inspiration points, I'm not as worried about like, crossing people up or creating too much music, but yeah, I try to be better about it. This album I sold myself, Live 95 came out in October, and I'm going to try my best to not put anything else out until October, at least, of 2022. So we'll see. It's been almost 2 months now. And I'm holding on. We're just doing some remixes. We did a remix to one song, Comeback Player of the Year. And so we're going to do some remixes and just new content around it to keep me from like, I don't want to say getting bored, but to keep me from like just wanting to try new things, And so that's what that is. And now I do a Patreon. So every two songs a month I put on Patreon or whatever I'm into at the moment. So those songs don't get released to the mainstream until maybe later, maybe even a year later, Well, so that's kind of how I do it.
As you were saying about not releasing music, it's like I could see the itch. Like the even as you were talking about it, you were like there's still you that be like, it's like that inner critic who's like always released music. Like I'm always paranoid about getting guests, even though like I don't really struggle that much anymore to get guests, but it's like that starting podcaster that's always like, you got to keep getting more guests, because what if you run out of guests? It's like this. I could just see that in your body language, that when you were talking about it, you were like,
that's fair.
It's like an addiction. You're just addicted.
Oh, yeah. I think every artist and probably podcast host too, you could tell me, Aaron, but you got to believe that your best work is ahead of you, and that you're getting better every day. And so you want to show that, so I think that's what it comes down to. And it's like, man, I know you like this, but I got this other thing that's really going to move you, And so, yeah, it's just I have so many ideas. And I think a lot of that comes from me being so connected to video games, comic books, other pieces of media. Like my well of inspiration is like limitless now. So it's a pretty dope feeling to be able to be like, hey, I can watch a show tomorrow and then be like, oh, man, I really found something new in there, or a comic book. And then, oh, man, I found something I can write about from that,
Well, I think the cool thing about you is exactly what you said. I mean, I've said on this podcast that I think there are some artists who release too much music and doesn't let artists like the fans digest it. But because your music is directed to a specific audience at any given time, it kind of helps you, because I feel like a lot of artists, they just release the same album 4 different times in the same and it's like
yes,
and that's my critique. My critique is like, I heard this already, and if it's not bangers, then I'm probably not going to listen to them all. And then I just start becoming one of those fans who's like, it becomes effort now for me to try and find the killers. And then so if you have this 4 albums and they're all the same, condense it to one and make it just a killer album rather than just everything. But if you're doing different things, then I understand you throwing out more projects because you're hitting different markets.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense for me because my audiences are very different, but I've always been into like making sure that every album sounds different. So I'm going through a different experience before I write it. I'm working with a different producer. But, there are some folks who can put out a lot of music, feed a very specific need from an audience, and then and make a good living off of it, So it's a fine line, it really is a fine line. But I think whatever you put out, you got to put your all into it. And if you feel like you put your all into it, then put it out.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, nothing that I want more than artists to be able to make a living off their art form. And if that's how you do it, that's how you do it. Like, I'm not going to be the one who's like, always listen to me. It is purely like just my opinion on, as a fan. And I come through, and my opinion is always as a fan rather than as an artist, because I don't release music myself. So it's interesting to hear the opposite perspective, because I'm just going like, oh, what do I want to listen to? And how much attention can I give as one fan? But then again, there's like billions of people in the world. So you don't need every fan. You just need, a small portion of how many people there are.
Yeah, all you need. I read a book about it. They say all you need is 1,000 true fans, and a true fan is a person that will buy everything you put out, and think about that. If you had 1,000 true, even podcast listeners who will listen to everything and share everything, I think it puts you in a good position, So yeah, that's really all you need. It's a very small percentage of the rest of the world.
I agree. I mean, to be honest, if I had 1,000 fans reaching out every day going, hey, what you released was amazing, that'd be awesome. It's like everyone says it's about your true fans, not the casual listeners. That's what you want to get. The casual listeners are good, but like if you can get true fans, that's where you actually make your living.
Absolutely. That's what you need, the true fan. And remember, a fan, I guess, is short for fanatic, but in a nice way. But a person who will literally purchase or listen to every single thing you put out, even if it's a thing that's like, oh, that wasn't really my cup of tea, but I love you so much that I want to hear that, and that's all you need is those people that are like, oh, when's the next episode? When's the next one? When's the next one? And those people will keep you in business for a very long time.
Well, have you had fans of yours reach out and give you like feedback about the things that you're doing? Because I feel like, because you hit quite a particular niche in the industry, you would have a lot of people who are exposed to, your music that probably wouldn't necessarily be exposed to it ordinarily.
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer that, yeah, I get tons of fans that reach out, and it's usually like very supportive messages like, oh my gosh, I listened to this and it got me through a rough time, and things like that. I keep a whole folder on my like desktop of like really nice messages I get for like motivation, and I flip through them. And it's people, saying things like, oh man, like this game meant a lot to me. This line you said meant a lot to me. It kept me going, things like that. So I don't necessarily create for that. I create for myself. And to talk about the things that I've gone through and how I've gotten through them. And it's just always awesome and a blessing when people can tell me like they had the same struggle, because for the longest time, I thought I was the only one. Like I was the only hip hop kid who also liked G.I. Joe, Transformers, video games, Kung Fu flicks, No, I was not. You know what I mean? There's so many other people who were into these same things, but never had their worlds come together, like I was able to bring them, so they've been very thankful. So yeah, I get lots of messages. I feel like I'm a very accessible artist. So for that reason, because I feel like I was built on the internet, and I've like never forgotten that, like, because I was built on the internet, I make sure to respond to every tweet, make sure to talk to every person. I respond when I can to every message, and talk to folks at the merch table at shows, and give, make sure that they're having, the best time possible.
I think that, a lot of artists struggle with that but it's awesome to hear that. And to be honest, my experience with you is also like you do a pretty good job of like responding, because it gets overwhelming at some stage to be like, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of messages. And then obviously you've still got your schedule to get as well. You're still organizing tours, you're still organizing recording, release, marketing, the whole lot. So I think you do a pretty good job when it comes to that front.
Thank you. I have a manager now the last couple of years, but that has helped me out a lot with that. And sometimes he'll tell me too, like, hey, I think you're a little too accessible. Like this month, you maybe need to like just back up and not, answer things. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your space. And the Will Smith book talks about that too. Like just making a real concerted effort to reclaim your space and your time. So if there's a time where you just don't want to share or don't want to chat, you just have to take that, and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Will Smith has been sharing a lot lately. He does a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, I think you can calm down a little bit.
There's a petition. Did you see there's a petition to get them to stop talking to the media? I'm like, that's so good. Like, yeah, I think at some point it gets to be too much where you're like, okay, I know you guys want to share. I know you got things to promote, but like, you're like America's favorite couple. Like, please stop telling us things that make us like look at you differently. Like, we have to like at some point, enough's enough. Like,
they're just so honest. I don't understand. They're just so honest. Like and they literally seek out to say the things that they say. Like, if that shit was going on in my life, I'd be like, I'm not telling anybody until it's sorted.
Yeah, I wouldn't tell anybody. But they are oversharers, I think, at this point.
I think they're almost addicted to it. I think you get addicted to like, the bombshell moment, and then everyone's talking about you in a weird way. It feeds the ego as well. I don't know. It's a weird space that they're in. I mean, I just want to see Will Smith get back to what he does best.
Exactly. It's like, I don't need the behind the scenes stuff. Like, I don't need it. That's what I buy the book for,
Yeah. Well, I love artist books. They really are amazing. I've spoken already on this podcast about books, but 50 Cent's book, Hustle Harder, Hustle Smarter, Prodigy's book was amazing to listen to. So and I love when the artist reads the book. Nothing drives me, because I listen to the audio book, and nothing drives me more crazy when it's like, here's my book, but somebody else's voice. And I'm like,
yeah, I don't want that at all. So that's funny. I'm actually finishing up my audiobook right now. I released a book in January called Dream Master. It's a memoir about my journey. And I'm finishing the final chapter tomorrow, doing like the 2 bonus chapters. And this is the second one. And I'm going to get my wife to do like the intro of the book and the closing. And then it will be done. So I think right before Christmas, I will have the audiobook available. So if you got Audible or whatever you like to use for books, be on the lookout for Dream Master by me, Mega Ran.
How was it recording it, by the way? Because I've always wanted to ask, how is it reading it?
Sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks. Like you're just reading and reading and reading and reading, and then you mess up and like, oh, the words just start running together, and you got to take breaks. And it's probably 20 hours of work of trying to read these words. It's not easy at all. I can see why people hire other people. Now I understand, because it's no fun reading your own words. You want to change things, you want to add things, but then like you're not sure if you should. And then it's just, like it's the words on the page start getting jumbled. You start messing up and you're getting fatigued. And it's definitely the most fatiguing recording I've ever done.
Because also, like, I don't know about you, but I like to be able to just go on a run and just say whatever I want to say and let kind of my mind take over and go through in a thought passage. But being so structured would be really difficult, because it's like, not only have you already written it, you've already read it 1,000 times because it's now a book, but now you got to vocalize it. And I'm sure it feels a little bit like self-aggrandizing, like you're just like, I don't know, even me objectively thinking about it, like it just feels like a strange process to have to go to.
Yeah, it's very strange. It really is. Like that's an experience that, like, this writing, it's hard enough, but then like to have to recite it and relive it, it can be a lot. Like it's really a lot. Like I don't know how people do this for a living. Like it was just me writing down stories for a long time and then realizing I had enough for a book. But yeah, it's just a lot. It really is, but very fulfilling. And I'm looking forward to people reading it and listening to it and letting me know what they think, and being able to share a little bit with people about what it's really like,
Well, I feel like you've got a good voice for it, if I'm
Thank you.
Because I
appreciate that.
I think I would be I think I've got a good voice for it as well. So if anyone wants to hit me up and wants me to read their audiobook, I'll be the person.
Get on there and read it, do a script. There's you can go. They asked me when I wrote the book, the publisher was like, oh yeah, so, just go listen to these scripts on the site and then see who you want to hire. And I was like, hire? Like, yeah, to read your book. And I'm like, read my book? No, I'm reading it. There's no way I want someone else reading these personal moments, like it was them, but it's not, like, come on. I listened to OJ Simpson's book, and they had like an actor reading it, and he was like trying to sound like OJ. And it's just like annoying, I'm like, hire somebody. Don't you know who I am? And they're like, clearly they don't. So it's fine.
It's so funny. It's just, I remember trying to listen to Tyson Fury, the boxer's book, and he does like the prologue, and then he's like, oh, by the way, my best friend's now going to read the rest of the book. And I was like,
wow.
Oh,
he's like, yeah, I'm done. He's like, I don't have time for this.
Yeah, I got to go train. I can't be in the studio reading.
Wow. Yeah, he's like, this will be too long. I understand. Like, if I could do that, no, I wouldn't do it. Even if I could, like, I wouldn't, because I know as a fan, I wouldn't want to support that. I wouldn't want to purchase it. I wouldn't want to listen to it. So that's a big part of my career, is just kind of stepping into a fan and what they would be interested in. I think a lot of artists need to kind of step back a bit and think, like, what would a consumer want right now? And maybe you should kind of tailor this to like what you would enjoy if you were a fan.
Yeah, I think it's about being genuine, and everyone, like, if you buy the book, like if it's your book, people want to hear your voice, because that's who they came for. They didn't come for somebody else's rendition of your book. They came for you. So I like, autobiographies, all that kind of stuff, I think should be done by the person, but like, we get it, labor intensive, don't have the time. It makes sense.
It's hard work, man. People have things to do. Like, I get it. It's super hard work. Like, I would not recommend it to anyone if you're not used to doing that much reading, because it's very draining.
Well, I wanted to ask you this. If you could choose any game or any kind of pop culture moment or anything in pop culture to make the music for, do you have anything that's like on the bucket list for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I think something Marvel related would be the dream for me. Like, I've done games, WWE, like things that have already been on my bucket list, but like being a part of the Marvel universe, like if they're like, oh, Avengers needs a song, I'll be like, oh, of course, like I would love to do that. For sure. I want to be a member of a big moment, like in a movie where it's like, oh, this thing happened at this time when your music played. And you're like, what? Yes, And that would be a dream come true for me. So yeah, it's probably Marvel or just a movie in general.
That'd be awesome. Do you have like a favorite Marvel movie?
Black Panther, definitely. But the Avengers movies are also great. Captain America, Winter Soldier was awesome. So yeah, Thor. It's been some really good movies.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they wiped DC out of the world with them. I don't know what happened.
Man, me and my buddy were just talking about that. Actually, Bag of Tricks Cat. We were just like, why doesn't DC just focus on these gritty movies like Joker, and make real movies, not trying to follow the whole superhero formula. Just make real movies that happen to be about supervillains. Like you could make a Lex Luthor, origin movie that could be really gritty and great, So I don't want them to chase Marvel, like just make your own movies and do your own thing. But whenever they try to chase, it never turns out as good.
Now, do you know what it is? The scripts are weird and the storylines really are a lot of exposition. And for people who don't know exposition, it's like when characters explain the plot to you. It's and you're this person and nothing annoys me more when they treat audiences like idiots, where they're like, oh, I did all these things and you saw them, but let me explain them to you because I don't think you understood. And I hate that because it's like pointless.
Yeah, that's the worst. Don't insult your audience's intelligence. And there's definitely a lot of that in the DC movies. But I would still do a song for DC as well. So hit me up.
So critiques, but we're not above working. Maybe here's what it is. You're the missing link. This is what we're saying. We're saying that there's something missing and Mega Ran is the one to bring it all together.
There we go. I like that a lot.
So this is my salesperson coming out again, figuring out the soft pitch. But yeah, I mean, I'm just looking forward to the new Batman. I've heard great things about the new Batman. I think they really should stick to the gritty stuff. They've done fantastic work when they've gone real. I 100% agree that when they're real, when the characters have depth and when they have flaws. And for some reason, they don't seem to give their superheroes flaws. They give the supervillains flaws. And then the villains become more interesting.
Yeah.
But I want heroes with flaws. That's what made Iron Man so interesting, is he has flaws and he's not the perfect person that he wants to be.
Exactly. He doesn't have to be perfect. Like, I love that about the Iron Man. That's like really the only one that they've done that with, where he was an absolute like human, and I think they should continue that, like go into, situations and people who aren't perfect, maybe just fall back on the special effects a little bit and just try to create a real feeling story.
Well, I did like Winter Soldier and Civil War when, Captain America and Iron Man fight, because that is, the two opposing opinions, and you see the flaws in both of them, that one is too focused on what is right and the other one is like, I just like that interaction of like, again, it's like they just went in an interesting direction. That's what DC hasn't done. They haven't gone into directions that are interesting and not usual.
No, they really haven't. I'm hoping at some point they can, because they have a lot of great stories and great characters that I think could be like really fleshed out and do a good job. I think they're trying to build a cinematic universe so that they can eventually become a viable threat to Marvel, so that they can say, hey, now we can come together, Marvel versus DC, our universe. It's like, I think they're just trying to impress Big Brother Marvel, with these movies. Like, huh? Are we there? Are we there yet? You're like, no, you're not there yet.
Yeah, they're still a little while away, but you know what? It is what it is. I can't complain. I mean, we've gotten some amazing movies out of it. They do Batman really well. That's what I'm gonna say. They I don't know. Yeah. They nail Batman every time. Anyone to do with Batman, they just nail it out of the park.
They do. They give it a lot of effort, and they need to. Like, he's their guy, And
it feels like, every boy is like, I'd like to be Batman, even though he has no superpowers.
Right.
Well, man, I only have one more question for you, and it's the only question that I plan on the podcast. And it might be the hardest one. I don't know. Some people find it hard. Some people find it easy. But if you had to recommend one album that everybody listens to at least once to get an appreciation of, can't be your own, can be any genre, what would it be?
Whoa, man. Dang. Wow, this is so hard. Oh man, I might need a break for this to come back. No.
Well, talk me through.
Honestly, okay, this is easy. I think it's easy for me, honestly, because I play it every single road trip. It's for me, Public Enemy, and Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. I think it's one of the greatest rap albums of all time, and the fact that it's a record that was created with so many different samples and sounds, like, so the production is super interesting. It's probably the greatest MC voice of all time, Chuck D, with Flavor Flav hyping. There's so many interesting elements to these songs, and they're all like very important songs with great subject matter. So you're going to get something out of every single listen of that. You may even pick something new up each time you listen. So that is, if you're sort of a hip hop fan, or like just a new school hip hop fan, but hasn't heard a lot of old school, or you didn't think old school could compete, sonically with what's happening today. This album is certainly an exception. They did so much sampling on that record that couldn't even be done today. Like, I don't even think that album could come out today, just because of all the samples and sounds, and it's extremely interesting just to think that they did this in 88. Yeah. And which was arguably the golden era of hip hop, and to create a record that could stand not only above and with what's happening, but will stand the test of time that 30 years later you can still go back to. So that is my pick for sure. I think that's a must-hear album for anybody.
I love that pick. I love that pick. No one else has picked Public Enemy. You're the first. So nice. I think 80 plus episodes in, this Public Enemy makes an appearance, and iconic hip hop group as well. They did a lot for, what was to come in terms of sounds and sampling, like you said. So definitely worth checking out. And yeah, I mean, I'm always a fan of, like, even people who are into, modern hip hop, to go back and check out the 90s hip hop, because you'll learn something about what created the era that we're currently in. Like, that's what I'm a big fan of, is like, you got to understand the roots so that you can understand the journey, and then you can understand where we are right now, because hip hop back then was a completely different ball game.
Yes, it was. And this is an album that I think, like I said, it holds up. It stands the test of time, but it also shows you like what life was like then, what we were talking about. These songs, were getting like major airplay on the radio. Daytime radio was playing a lot of these songs that are like pretty hardcore, hard rap songs in 88. And it was just such a game-changing project that, is dang near flawless, man.
Well, I think at some point in our lives, radio will disappear in kind of the lexicon of where people get music. It's just getting less and less and less. I mean, I personally don't listen to radio. So like, I can imagine when I have kids at some point, they won't listen to radio, and it'll be like, hey, and I'll be telling them that when I was a kid, that the way you got music and the way you're exposed to it was like, you turn on the radio in your car and you're like, what do you mean? Spotify. Like,
right. Like, what's that? Spotify. What do you mean radio? But yeah, even now, like we have streaming TV, like YouTube TV. And so I very seldom watch live TV. And once in a while, I guess it was for sports is about the only reason I would need live TV. And so when I do watch it now, it's strange, because normally it's an on-demand situation. When I turn the television on, I want to watch what I want to watch when I turned it on for.
Ad-free.
And ad-free. Yeah, there's very few times where I'm just flipping channels waiting for something to pop up interesting. Like, that just doesn't happen anymore.
Well, so even now with sport, KO is taking over. You've got, streaming services. You can buy NBA Live League Pass. I don't know how I ended up shouting out NBA Live League Pass. I just heard all the ads on KO talking about it, or when they, the broadcasters always talk about it. But like, you know, the era of, you know, waiting for something to pop up on TV really has gone. Like I remember me and my family when I was a kid, we would like sit down and watch something together. Whereas now it's like, hey, when do you want to watch it? Like you didn't have to book in the time. Now it's just like, it's Sunday night. What do you want to watch?
Yeah, that's real. Yeah, it was like, okay, Thursday, 8:00, we could gather around the TV. You know, that's what it was. And but now like we can organize and we can schedule that, which is it's just a weird thing, but another sign of the times, you know.
Blockbuster,
sure.
Like having to go to the video store and pick out a video, but then it's exactly the same. Like think of not being able to choose something to watch on Netflix, but live, and you're actually in person. It's way worse.
Yeah, like you actually drove somewhere and now you have to get back home and you got nothing there to watch. Like that's really depressing.
And then somebody else is like, "No, I don't want to watch that," and you're like, and then you find something and it's not available because somebody's already borrowed it, so you can't get it.
Oh, I hated that. Oh, the days, back in the days.
Well, man, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Mega Ran came through. Obviously, if you haven't checked him out, please make sure you check him out. Check him out, Spotify, IG, Twitter. He's got it all. Obviously, you're streaming as well. Do you want to shout out what you're streaming? And yeah, I saw the light bulb.
Absolutely. I got to talk about streaming. I've been going pretty hard on Twitch. So twitch.tv/Megaran. I've been playing a lot of Halo. The campaign comes out, I think, in another day or two. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but Halo Infinite. Out by that
point. So it's already out. So if you want to make sure you check out Megaran on his Twitch, he's going to be playing.
Yeah, I'll be playing it. So I do a different thing each day. Monday, I do Monday Night Ran, which is DJing. I'll play like wrestling music, video game music, and hip hop. Tuesday, I'll play maybe 2K. So I play a basketball game. Wednesday, I'm in the studio. So I bring the cameras with me and set up, and you watch me record, make songs for Patreon. Thursday's Throwback Thursday, and then Free Play Friday, which is when I'll be playing Halo. So come through, drop some love in the chat. Tell us you came from the pod, and we appreciate you.
And what time do you usually have your stream? Is it a set time or does it fluctuate?
Yeah, between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Awesome. So for anyone in Australia, you're going to have to figure out what that is because it's very difficult, but no, it's not that bad. Literally, there's so many websites. That's what I do. I just click in and go. They convert it for you. It makes sense. But yeah, definitely check him out. Also, you know, huge catalog. So make sure you check out all the music, subscribe, and don't miss out. And as I said, worked with some fantastic artists. Got on the Billboard top 200 as well, which is an amazing feat. And yeah, absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Dude, Aaron, thank you so much, man. This has been a lot of fun.